Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 36 of Days Gone By, the review series for Gran Turismo's classic and vintage car lineup. A pretty strong one, it has to be said, from Europe, Japan, America. There is a very decent selection of classics in particular. Not so impressive as far as the vintage cars go, but there are some peppered in there as well. Now, this particular pick of classic is one of the quicker classics and one of the more powerful classics, especially non-American, because pretty much all of the American classics, with only a couple of exceptions, are extremely fast and generally very powerful. The classics from Europe and Japan, however, with some exceptions, don't tend to be quite as powerful. Some of them, though, are, and this is one of those vehicles. It's a Ferrari, of course, the Ferrari 365 GTB, a car which, of course, the iconic Ferrari Daytona was developed from, and this particular vehicle is pretty expensive, but understandably so. It is a Ferrari after all, and they're pretty much all expensive for what they are, but it's also a classic Ferrari, a very significant classic one. Now, this is, of course, a front-engine GT-style Ferrari, more of a long-distance machine, and when Ferrari makes vehicles like that, which isn't as often, they do tend to stick fairly closely to mid-engine rear-wheel drive cars, but when they do make long-distance GTs, they do it very well. They're very elegant, impressive, generally extremely quick in a straight line, but perhaps not the first choice of track car. So how does this car measure up, both to other classic Ferraris, but also, more importantly, to other classics in general? Because straight off the bat, you're looking at 550,000 credits for this car, and even for a Ferrari, that's quite a bit. That is a lot more expensive than most of the other Ferraris in the dealership. So, the question remains, what do you get for that 550,000 credits? Well, you get a naturally aspirated 4.4 litre engine, and even though it's naturally aspirated, which may seem kind of like a downside for a classic, it's really not, because that engine still puts out 708 horsepower. Imagine what that engine could do with a turbo or supercharger. It's kind of a shame that we can't explore that aspect, but still, 708 horsepower is certainly no slouch. It also puts out 567 foot-pounds of torque, which is also pretty high for a Ferrari, and again, that is a trait of their more longer distance vehicles. The weight is remarkably good, given the fact that it is more of a GT style machine, not a stripped out track car. 1,053 kilos is what you're looking at with the full weight loss package, and that is very good for a car which isn't overly small. This is a decent sized vehicle with a decent level of kit. The horsepower per tonne is supercar level, compared to some supercars, 672. That is really impressive, especially for a car of its age. The PP when fully tuned is pretty high, perhaps a little too high at 603, but one of the reasons why this car is so good is because, unlike some other classics, it doesn't succumb to its age as far as ability goes. This is a car which is as competitive now as you'd have imagined it being back then. This is a brilliant classic GT car, and although personally I'm not a huge fan of the way this particular model looks, although I don't think it's a bad looking car, I just prefer other Ferraris, it has an ability which goes so far beyond what you'd expect of the car. Now, the particular car that you can see in this video is not fully tuned, as they often would be in my reviews. It's tuned, but not to the max. And even when you do tune it to the max, it copes with that power, which really is a lot of power for a classic to cope with, really well. And the way that the car copes with the power is actually the most impressive with regard to its handling. Because in a straight line, you're pretty much guaranteed for it to be quick. And it is quick. You're looking around or over 250 miles per hour, which isn't too surprising, but is good nonetheless. The acceleration is, as you'd expect, pretty strong for a classic. But the handling is the most amazing thing about this car, because most classics, especially Italian ones, which tend to be more notorious for handling, especially Lambos, it does handle itself remarkably well. The handling is smooth, it's easy to drive, even fully tuned, and above all else, it's competitive. It actually shares that with the much more popular choice of the Lamborghini Countach. The Countach is extremely competitive despite its age, and it shares that with the 365 GTB. This is still a really competitive machine, and although I definitely wouldn't recommend racing it at 600 pp, for something more like 500, maybe even 525, and definitely lower, it can be very competitive. And to be honest, if you are racing against purely other classics, you can definitely take it higher and be competitive. If you're racing it against modern cars, you're going to struggle once you start getting above 525. If you're racing it against other classics though, even stuff like the Stingray Racer concept, or to some degree even the Countach, this car can still run with those vehicles, and in many cases it can beat a lot of other high-performance classics. Now, of course, you've got a huge amount of power to work with, far more in fact than most of the other Italian or European classics in general. But what the car does as an overall package is what makes it so good. It's got acceleration, top speed, pure power and torque, but also, above all else, it can turn all of that on-paper ability into actual, usable, remarkably beginner-friendly circuit racing ability. It's a competitive vehicle, and although yes, it is a pretty expensive one at $550,000, it's not necessarily a vehicle that I would recommend for everyone. You do need to be a classic enthusiast to some degree, but to be honest, even if you're not, if you're just looking for a good PP vehicle, like the Countach, then this is a severely undervalued one. You see some people using it, but not necessarily for PP racing, and that is where this car really shines. But that's it overall for this pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.